Okay. All right, thank you all. It's really great to see you. Happy Sunday. As you know, and especially for any of you whom I've walked in the last few minutes, we're celebrating the 100-year birthday of our founders, Reverend and Mrs. Moon. Reverend Moon passed away almost 8 years ago, so we were celebrating as if he would have turned 100 this year. So that was a really beautiful video prepared by our headquarters media team. And we're going to be celebrating more a little bit later. But for my message today, I am going to be finishing up the series on beginning the year with God. And we've had some really great messages. I hope that it's been helpful for all of you to be able to consider how I could start my year with God, what goals I want, what do I want to see happen in my life this year, what do I want to contribute in my life this year. For today, I thought to talk about beginning with faith. You know, faith is a term that we throw around a lot very easily in religion, right? We talk about faith all the time, right? The Hebrews says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You know, we've heard this many times, right? But I think that I want to talk about a very specific aspect of faith that maybe we don't talk about so much. And I think that it's important for us in order to actually consider how we're going to start our year, this aspect of faith. Now, there's, of course, the aspect of faith that we see God, you know, we see that God is working in this world, right? This is something that we believe in as people of faith, that God is not just sitting back and enjoying the show, so to speak, but God is actively working in this world. God is using different paths and avenues to affect change in this world. This is something that we believe. But in some sense, that's not very personal to my life. You know, it's like, well, God is working maybe on a large scale of things. But what about me? What about you? This is something that we actually really need to consider when thinking about my life and especially this year going forward. I have a quote here from our founder, Reverend Moon. He says, "There are many things taking place in human society, but beyond our consciousness, there is God's will working behind the scenes." This reinforces our understanding that God is working in this world. But I want to talk about a very specific kind of faith today. That's not quite this. This is the faith that God is working and present in my life, in my personal life, or in my family. In some sense, it's easier to consider that God is alive and working in the world than it is to think God is alive and working in my life, or God is working through me. I think that in some ways, that's actually harder for us to accept, or harder to digest, because frankly, we see all our own shortcomings. We see all our own problems. We see that, you know, we don't always have our life together. And we ask, how can God use me? Or how can God be working through somebody like me? How can God be working in my life? Sometimes we think, and maybe not all of us, I know that for myself, sometimes it's easy to think, yeah, I don't know about that sometimes. But we have to consider, well, what are the circumstances or what are the characteristics that God needs in order to be able to be present or to be working in a person's life? And in reality, when we look at the Bible and we look at history and we look at people of God in the past, then actually we find that God often is not necessarily working through the so-called perfect people. The people that do everything right, the people that never make mistakes. Often God is working through and using people who have made terrible mistakes in their life, who have lived, you know, maybe what we would consider to be a problematic life, made bad decisions, but came to a point in their life where they made a turnaround. They repented. As we know, God used Paul to be one of the greatest crusaders of Christianity. But he was a person that persecuted Christians, killed Christians. He was the opposite of the kind of person you would think God would want to work through to be able to spread Christianity to the rest of the world. Yet it happened. So I want to talk about this story that we've talked about before, but somehow I keep coming back to the story of the prodigal son, okay? So the story of the prodigal son, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, happens in Luke. And the idea is that there's two sons in the family. And one of the sons decides that he's going to go to his father and ask for his inheritance early. And he decides that he wants to go and just enjoy his life. So he goes and he parties, and he just does whatever he wants. And then at the end of the day, he's totally at a rut in his life. He's kind of at the bottom, and he doesn't have any money, and he's working for some person, but he never has enough money to even afford the food to keep himself full. So he wakes up one day and he thinks to himself, man, even my father's servants have enough food. What am I doing? I should go back to my father, and I'll tell him, Father, I have sinned. I'm not even worthy to be called your son. Just hire me as a servant. That's a kind of a sad thing, right? Because maybe in some ways he could just go back and say, well, I'm your son, please take me back, and let me enjoy the life I had before. But no, he says, just take me as a servant. I know I've messed up. I know I wasn't responsible with the fortune you gave me, or however much, I don't know if it was a fortune, but it was something. I've learned my lesson. Please let me just be a servant. But the father embraces him and welcomes him back with open arms, and kills the fattest cow or whatever they had available, and provides a feast for this. He's so happy that the son came back. Now, all of you have heard this story, and we've talked about this story before, but the thing I want to focus on today is actually the part of the story that happens after that. Well, sort of after that, at the end. So this part of the story happens after the son returns. So the other son, who has been the faithful son, who's done everything right, he served his father faithfully, he did not waste the money, and so on and so forth. He was, the faithful son. This is his reaction. So meanwhile, the older son was in the field, working hard, of course. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. And he said, your brother has come, he replied. And your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and I never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So this is a story, right? Jesus is sharing a story with his followers. It's a parable. But I think there's a lot of really good lessons to learn from this story. And sometimes I go back and forth. Sometimes I wonder what the real point of this story was. Of course, there's the aspect of the story that of the title of the story, right? The parable of the lost son. So the story of redemption, the story of repentance, the story of the lost son coming back, and the father, representing God, I assume, is so happy to see the son that he just embraces him, doesn't care about all the mistakes he made or the way he squandered his life, just happy that the son turned his life around and came back. That's all he really cares about. But then there's the other side of the story, which sometimes I wonder, maybe this was the real point that Jesus was trying to share, which is the attitude of the I think older brother. and how the older brother wasn't happy that the son, well, maybe he was happy that the son came back, but he wasn't happy that, maybe he thought, well, maybe the father should have reprimanded the son, or maybe he should have made him pay for his mistakes by having him work as a servant in the fields, and showed him how big of a mistake he made in his life, or something like that. He was very, I guess you could say, very judgmental. But at the same time, I think about, well, given the circumstances in a real life situation, if this was a real family and these were real people, who would God probably feel closer to in the situation? Probably the younger son, the son that had turned his life around and come back, which is kind of interesting because in some ways, this older brother, he gave his whole life for the family. Maybe if this father represents God, you could say the son gave his whole life to God. And he in his life maybe lived the most morally upright life, never caused the father any pain, did whatever the father needed, worked hard for the father, worked hard for the family, worked hard for the estate. And he did everything that was ever asked of him. I think that this is an important point to reflect on. Who maybe did God gravitate closer to? At the end of the day, even though the older son did all these things right, but somehow he didn't inherit the heart that his father had for his brother. This is kind of the sad point of the story. Even though he did all these things right for his family, he couldn't be happy for his brother when he came home. He couldn't understand, why would my father do so much for this person? He couldn't be happy for his brother, and he couldn't be happy for his father. Or maybe he just felt a lack of love. Maybe he just felt that, where's my appreciation? Where's my gratitude? But the father said, everything I have is yours. He said that somewhere here. Where did he say that? Oh, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. So there was no lack of love on the part of the father. The father loved his son. But I think that sometimes, and I think this is a real lesson for people of faith, people of religion. We think sometimes, I'm doing all the things that God has asked me to do. And so sometimes I think that we think that makes us maybe more worthy of appreciation, or more worthy of gratitude, or more worthy of love, above and beyond the prodigal sons, many of who are maybe not sitting in this room today. But it's a lesson for us to remember, to humble ourselves, and to realize that, God, of course, appreciates our faith, our attendance, our efforts, above and beyond maybe what other people are willing to do. But we can't let that get in the way of the heart that we can have for maybe our wayward siblings, our wayward children, the people who are to come in the days beyond. Sometimes we have to humble ourselves. I remember a number of years ago when I was on GPA like these guys, of course we called it STF at the time, I was doing my gap year service, and I had a team leader who I really struggled with a lot. And I really criticized in my heart, sometimes with my words, the way he did things. Maybe when I get criticism, maybe it's a little bit of the karma coming back around. But especially in the area of money, I really didn't like the way he managed money. And one day, I had parked in a handicapped parking spot, and I didn't know. And I got like a $400 parking ticket. And I didn't have $400 to pay for the ticket. and I didn't really know what else to do. But I thought to myself, man, this is such a waste of money, like $400 for a parking ticket. But I had to swallow my pride and go to my team leader and show him the ticket. And I thought he was going to get really upset at me because I had criticized him so much in my heart and, like I said, a little bit, through my actions and words. And I thought that he would say, this is because of because you weren't united with me, or your attitude was poor, that this could happen, or something like that, because that's kind of the way I felt. But I was really surprised. He just graciously told me to put the tickets on the table and said he'd take care of it, and I walked out of the office. I felt grace. I felt I didn't deserve that. My attitude was so rotten. It was so bad, guys. Like, you have no idea. It was really bad. It was a rough year for me. But my attitude was so bad. And I didn't do anything to help. And I was in a position of leadership, too. I had a group of people that I was taking care of. But my attitude was bad. I didn't have any way of instructing or teaching my, what's the word? Underlings? That's not the word, but whatever. On how to have the right attitude. So it was just bad all around. But even still, he was gracious with me, and I could really repent from that experience. Like, yeah, maybe perhaps I'm right about some things, but my attitude was wrong, and my attitude was not that of God. And so looking back at the parable of the prodigal son, my attitude was kind of like judging my parent, my father, my leader, because I was seeing things from my own kind of self-centered point of view. It was a good lesson for me. I also recently had the opportunity to read a book. It was a memoir by one of our early American Unification members. His name is Farley Jones. And if you know him, or if you don't know him, or if you're interested in reading a memoir by an early Unificationist member, I really recommend you read this book. It's really, really well written, and it gave me some really interesting insights into what the early days of our church was like. One of the things that I got out of reading his memoirs was that he was one of the first presidents of our church, and he's had many experiences being closely involved in church activities, and many experiences also, developing his career and being a lawyer for 30 years and raising his family, many different things like that. One of the things I loved so much about his memoirs was that it showed how much that regardless of where you're at in your life or what you are doing, God is still present and working and doing things in his life. Regardless, even if he was not so, connected with all the inner things and being, doing the missions work and being, deeply involved in the church world, he was still experiencing God. God was still present in his life. And I think that I actually had to really digest that point. I think that sometimes it's easy for us to feel like maybe if I'm not doing a certain number of things, or if I'm not doing the things that are being asked of me, or if I'm not living up to my expectations of what a life of faith looks like, that maybe God doesn't, I think that intellectually we understand that God loves me, that God is present in my life, but I think that on a more artistic level, we feel a little bit of guilt, we feel a little bit of shame, we feel like maybe God doesn't care about me. I think that if we're really honest with ourselves, this can be a reality in many of our lives. I know that for myself personally, I've, even in a position as a church pastor and all these things, there are many times where I wonder, does God actually really care about me? Or is God really present? And, I have so many shortcomings. I have so many areas of my life that I need work on, God surely would prefer to work with somebody who is more capable or more professional or a better speaker or whatever. I think that that's a little bit of a rabbit hole that doesn't really have an end. Like it's not productive to go down that hole. I mean, it's not a bad thing to consider, to meditate on, to pray about, to ask God. But I think that at the end of the day, we all have felt, I think most of us, hopefully, have felt that God at one point in my life was very present in my life. Felt very close to God. Maybe we still feel that way, maybe we don't. I don't know where each and every one of you are at. I think that we have to remind ourselves. Maybe someone has to tell you or reassure you that that God that was close to you, maybe at one point in your life, or you felt close to, or that was present in your life, didn't go anywhere. He's not leaving you alone just because maybe you don't feel like you're living the quote-unquote most spiritual life. God is always present in our lives. God is always working in our lives. Maybe we don't see it. Maybe we don't feel it in the moment. But I think that we have to have faith in that point. We have to remind ourselves of that point. Now, maybe there are certain actions or attitudes or habits in our life that are preventing us from feeling God in the way that we should, or from making God more present in our life. That's a reality that we have to come to terms with. But I think that we should not be under the assumption or the idea that God is going to forsake us because maybe we're not upholding a certain standard or expectation of ourselves in a life of faith. So I believe that this was an important topic to talk about because, when we're thinking about how I want my year to go, our mindset is everything. If we don't really believe that God is present in my life or God cares about me, then that's going to shape how my year or my expectations for my year or my life or my family. But if we can remind ourselves, reassure ourselves that God is deeply concerned and cares about what happens in my life, that what happens in my life actually matters to God, it's a shift of mindset. That's why our founder here says, and this is a very common mantra in self-development world, business world, all these kind of things. He says, your actions will follow your mind. So determine in your mind and your body will follow. The main thing is your mind, your state of mind. And then lastly, I want to leave you with this quote, also from our founder, Reverend Moon. He said, as a year consists of 4 seasons, in your life there is a spring-like period in which you receive blessing, a summer-like period in which the blessing grows, an autumn-like period in which you bear the fruit of the blessing, and then a winter-like period of trial. Therefore, be grateful for trials. They come from the love of God to separate us from Satan. If you endure and overcome them, a spring-like period of new blessing will follow. And I think this is good to remember. That being said, please join me in prayer. Dearest Heavenly Parent, we thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for all the brothers and sisters and our whole community that have come together this morning to focus our lives, focus our week on your word, on this message. I pray that it could have spoken to somebody who needed to hear it, that we can all remind ourselves that regardless of where we're at in our lives, we're not too far gone, we're not forsaken by you, that there is always redemption, there is always grace, Heavenly Parent, even if we feel like we don't deserve it. I pray, Heavenly Parent, that as a community, as families, and as individuals, that we can remind ourselves that you have never left us. You are always here with us. I hope that we can walk together with you. Please always guide our families, our community. Heavenly Parent, we want to be a community that makes you proud, that inspires you, even though we make mistakes from time to time. I pray that we always be heading in your direction, always be striving to embody your love and your character in this world. It's what you need. It's what you need to see happen. We're so grateful for your presence in our lives. even if we may be in the spring or the winter or the fall or the summer periods of our life, I pray that we can always be grateful and seek for always becoming better and always seek for your grace and your guidance in our lives. I offer this prayer in my name, Michael Adonia Hendrick, a Blessed Central family. Amen and adieu. Thank you.